channel. This is the Darklight Emissary, and first off, it's been a little while since my last video, so if you're here for this one, thanks for waiting. If you're new, welcome. And we're going to dive straight into another lore iceberg for Warhammer 40k here. And because of the nature of a iceberg lore video, this is going to be a longer form video, and most likely going to be split up into a few different videos in a series, just so I can get through all of it in a reasonable amount of time and not try to just have a marathon editing session to get this all put together, and rendering session, all of the stuff that goes into making these videos. But without further ado, let's dive straight in. We got a lot of topics to cover. I did do a previous iceberg video just a little bit ago, but this one I felt had other things in it than that one didn't. There is some overlap, but not a lot, so I figured it would be worth it. So sit back and loot in Tarkov or whatever you're doing right now, and I hope you have fun with this video, and like and subscribe if you haven't already. Alright, the first layer of this is pretty easy to go over briefly. The Imperium are not the good guys. I don't think the Imperium ever claimed they were the good guys. They just claim human supremacy, I guess, is the thing that they claim unashamedly. But I do not believe that humanity believes, at least in the Imperium, that they are somehow a good or altruistic government or mandate or something like that. And this is one of the core reasons I've really enjoyed Warhammer over the last 20-ish years, because so many sci-fi and fantasy worlds and universes are built upon the intrinsic good in humanity, or presumptive good. You've got, the pluckiness of humanity going out bright-eyed and bushy-tailed into a new galaxy or universe, and they discover aliens who are ancient and evil, and they gotta fight them in the most, tropish, linear storytelling. Often humanity is behind on technology, with the exception of some universes that have come up in recent years. And then Warhammer, just unapologetically, humanity is kind of a somewhat evil, ancient human empire that is on its last leg and fighting even worse scary things that came out of its closet 10,000 years ago. Or maybe it's more appropriate to say it came out of their basement. But anyway, my point being that humanity does not really apologize for what it is in Warhammer, which I kind of find refreshing. And I like that they are not your typical, just, honky-dory, like, we come in peace human empire that we just see in a lot of stuff. You might get, like, an evil human faction, but usually there's, like, a good human faction to wait them out. And to a degree, you kind of get that with individual characters in Warhammer. Certainly not all the individuals in Warhammer are evil, or not even not good guys, but they are part of a system that they can't exactly escape from. Whether or not they are truly loyal to that system or care about it is another thing entirely, and depends on who you're seeing through whose eyes, but that's what makes Warhammer fun to me, is that we get to see the Empire through the perspective of many different people, many different walks of life. Whether you're a Space Marine, or an Inquisitor, or just a general guardsman, you get to see life through many different perspectives, and often you get that character's take on living in that universe and what they think on things. And while the Imperium is not necessarily huge on freedom of thought, usually the higher-ranking members of the society can say more about what they think and how they feel. Rabaut Guilliman has a lot of advisors around him that he really seems to value speaking open-mindedly to him about things, as an example of that. And as you go down the rungs of rank within the Imperium, down to, the poorest in society, the menial workers, obviously they don't have much say or much knowledge on anything to really discuss. So certainly there's a pecking order and things like that, but ultimately I don't think that if you asked any of the leadership of the Imperium whether they thought they were good guys, I think they would look at you kind of perplexed, like, what kind of question even is that? We're just kind of fighting for survival here, and we don't really think about it on, some absolutist moral scale. Alright, the next one that's on here, I kind of wonder why it's here, honestly, in some ways. The Horus Heresy. I mean, if you're in this video, if you're new to Warhammer, the Horus Heresy is kind of a fundamental baseline for the human storyline. I think you might have heard of it before you have gotten to this video. If you somehow got to this video and you don't know what the Horus Heresy is, I would recommend looking that up before listening to what I have to say on it. And it's kind of hard to condense 20 years of novels about that exact subject into a boilerplate here that would serve it justice, in my opinion. But to put it in an extremely condensed summary, essentially it's how humanity got to where it is in Warhammer 40k. It happened 10,000 years before the current timeline, and it's why and how the Emperor ended up on the Golden Throne, and why there are Chaos Space Marines, Chaos Legions, why there are basically fallen humans to Chaos in large degree that used to be loyal to the Imperium of Man and to the Emperor. Essentially, half of the Emperor's forces turned against him in a ploy by the Chaos Gods to neuter the Imperium's ambitions to expand and take over the galaxy, essentially. And other than that, I'm not really going to state much on that topic. I have a ton of videos that kind of talk about the different legions from the Horus Heresy era. You can go check those out in the Primarchs playlist. And I have a lot of other topics that talk about that era. Several reviews of the end of that series, talking about the Emperor and theories about him. I know that a lot of people in the community don't really like the Horus Heresy due to it being fleshed out too much in their eyes, but for me, at least, I've been reading the books on that specific part of the setting for the last 20-ish years of my life, so I have a, soft spot for it. I don't think it's a perfect series by any means, but I do think it's often better than some of the standalone books that we get in the 40k era, so I would recommend reading the books if you can. Perhaps if you guys comment here that you want to get like a tier list of which books to read from that series, I could do that for you. Talk about my favorites in the Horus Heresy, or recommend an order to the books or something like that. I wouldn't be opposed to doing it, but I'd like to see some interest from you guys if you want to see that. I have read all of the Horus Heresy books, excluding some of the audiobook novellas, and excluding some of the Primarch novels, I think. But other than that, I've pretty much read the entire series from start to finish, from when it started to when it ended just earlier this year with the last few volumes of End in the Death. I just happened to find Horus Rising in a Barnes & Noble as a teenager and thought that looked cool. And the rest, as they say, is history. Kind of just dove in from there and kept up with the series as I have gotten older. And now want to talk incessantly on YouTube about Warhammer lore because I have nothing else to do with that lore knowledge. No one else around me wants to talk about it, so I'll talk with you guys about it. Anyways, I digress. Next topic is the Lost Primarchs. Much like the Horus Heresy, there is a lot of theories about the Lost Primarchs. So there was 20 Primarchs. 2 of them are missing or expunged from Imperial records. I, again, already have some videos that focus on this subject. I'll probably put a timeline click right here for you if you want to go jump to that and learn more in detail what I think about the Lost Primarchs. But essentially, from how I've understood it, the Lost Primarchs were not killed, I don't think. From what I know, and some of this comes from one of the creators of Warhammer themselves, is that when they made the Lost Primarchs a thing, it was, of course, to add some mystery to the setting, make it a bit more deep that way. And the guy said that essentially he kind of saw it as the Emperor giving them a form of forgiveness for something they did, or otherwise giving them a chance to leave and wipe all records of them. That's my reading of it. Nothing ever says explicitly what happened to them to keep the mystery. They're mentioned several times throughout the Horus Heresy books, but not in much detail at all. Plenty of people believe that they were killed by Lemon Russ of the Space Wolves Legion, who is known as the Emperor's executioner. Some people believe that the Lion might have killed them, but ultimately their ultimate fate is not really known. The only other thing that is kind of solidly known is it seems like their legions were folded into the Imperial Fists and the Ultramarines Legion during the later part of the Great Crusade, or during the Great Crusade at very least. Next, we have the next tier, start of the next tier here. Next, we have the Eldar Are Doomed. I guess they technically are right now. I mean, so the Eldari or the Eldar are, our lovely space elves, for those of you newer to the series, to the universe. The Eldari are one of the more ancient races. They have been around for millions and millions, up to, just millions of years. Tens of millions of years ago they were created, and they ruled the galaxy for a long time. And they are responsible for the creation of the fourth Chaos God, Slaanesh. They are the ones who ushered that god's existence into being, and with the birth of Slaanesh, the Eldari were consumed in their billions. Their souls were by Slaanesh, and this is what caused the Eye of Terror, which is a rip from the warp into real space. Such was the shock of the deaths, the psychic resonance, the shock from them, and the forceful birth of Slaanesh, that it literally tore a permanent hole between the two dimensions, because the warp is not of real space. Real space is not compatible with the warp, but we now have a tunnel leading directly into the nightmare realm of the warp, which is now used as a staging point for the forces of chaos into real space. If you have been around for a while in Warhammer, then you're familiar with that. And Cadia used to stand at its gate, and humanity has fought many wars to keep chaos at bay there. And Cadia recently was destroyed by Abaddon the Despoiler in his latest Black Crusade to assault humanity and try to get to the Emperor, try to defeat humanity essentially. And it turns out he was kind of doing different goals the entire time with his different Black Crusades over the centuries and millennia. And at the end of the 13th Black Crusade, they succeeded in destroying Cadia, which was just a major bastion point for humanity. And at this point now, the Eldari are a much diminished species, at least as far as the craft world Eldar are concerned, which is a more monkish, kind of neutral faction of Eldar in a lot of ways. And then you've got the Dark Eldar, who have not changed much since that great fall of their empire. I would call the Eldari the Dark Eldar, the Drukhari, I would call them the true inheritors of the mantle of the Eldar. The Drukhari probably possess the most ancient technology and know how to use it. They live in a alternate dimension within the webway itself. They live in a place called Kamarog, which I have a video on that if you want to talk more about that specific area. It's a very nightmarish area of between space, essentially between the warp and real space. And within there, you have just a huge, huge city. Like, I don't even know if a city's quite appropriate for it. It's just this nightmare labyrinthine realm, just full of the Drukhari or Dark Eldar, and they have been there since the fall of their species thousands of years earlier. And not much has changed about their society since then. What they practice in their society is kind of like a very refined form of hedonism in a lot of ways, and hedonism is a major contributor to what brought Slaanesh about. And now the Drukhari essentially use torture to keep their souls from being eaten by Slaanesh very slowly, and then the craft world Eldar have a different way to combat that. But ultimately, all this to say that the majority of the Drukhari are constantly having their souls slowly drained by this Chaos God who is intrinsically tied to their species. So in that way, the Eldari are close to being doomed, but then they do have the possibility of creating a new god, which is their god of death, Yanid. And if they are able to waken Yanid, it is said that this god will defeat Slaanesh and restore the species. So they are almost doomed, but in order to accomplish their goals, they need to collect crone swords, they're known as. And apparently one of those is actually in the Palace of Slaanesh, which is basically an impossible place for the Eldari to ever tread. And so that being said, there is theory amongst people that perhaps maybe the Eldari will ask one of the other followers of the other chaos gods to try to do a raid, make some kind of small alliance with, a rival god to help them out, because the chaos gods rarely play nice together, and, the other three gods don't really get along with Slaanesh very well. They don't get along with each other very well, ever. All four of them don't, but you do have rivalries that are more bitter than others within the four. And so there's a world where I could see some kind of raid stage to retrieve that Crone Sword in a bid to, get something over on Slaanesh from one of its rivals. Alright, next is the Ethereals use mind control to dominate the T'au. So the T'au are the youngest alien species we know of that is kind of active and, a faction you can play as in Warhammer, and has shown up over the years as kind of almost like a Japanese influenced type of, Gundam mech using. They're kind of like the plucky human empire I was talking about earlier, that the humanity is not. Instead, this alien species has the honor of being that. And then they're facing down things like, humanity, who's, again, very much this ancient, bitter empire. And then the T'au discover they're fighting worse things than themselves, and chaos and things like that. Fighting things like the Tyranids and Necrons, all kinds of stuff. And the T'au leadership are the Ethereals. And for a time, the T'au were often in fighting against each other. And then the Ethereals kind of show up out of left field and start uniting them into a single unified whole under a creed called the Greater Good. Nothing's ever been concretely said on where the Ethereals showed up from or why they follow the creed that they do, but they are the main leaders without question to the rest of the T'au Empire. And I'm not entirely sure where the idea of mind control comes from. The Ethereals are certainly very influential, very charismatic individuals. There is the Ultramarines novel Courage and Honor that shows a fight with the T'au Empire over a world, and essentially, and this world's known as Pavonis. And so in this book, we do get a look at one of the Ethereals, and then a human prisoner of war taken by them. And this Ethereal does touch the human's head with its hand, and the human experiences like a feeling of kind of like warmth and comfort flood over him. So the touch of an Ethereal does seem to soothe and calm nerves, and even kind of, tend to maybe even convince people to join with them. But it's not like a Ethereal is running around and, within physical contact of, the entire empire. So they seem to have a far-reaching ability to control their empire. But exactly what their powers are, we're not sure. The T'au are not a psychic race, so it's not psyker abilities of some kind. It's something else. And the T'au Empire is not made up of just the T'au species. It's also made up of a conglomerate of other xenospecies that they have brought into their fold that also follow this credo, as well as even humans have joined them over time as well. So there are human parts of the T'au Empire, and they all follow the greater good. So exactly what the Ethereals are doing and how they do it is kind of left to interpretation, and we don't know too much more about them, and they are not telling us much themselves. Alright, next in this layer, we have the Golden Throne is slowly failing. This is definitely fact more than theory, being in this iceberg. It's just simply lore that the Golden Throne, which is the apparatus keeping the Emperor alive and able to serve humanity still, is slowly running out of time to function. Only the Emperor really knew how the Golden Throne truly operated, and he can't really do anything with it anymore. He can only sustain its powers to protect Terra from the tear below it in the webway that keeps the demons from chaos from flooding through, and keeps essentially a new Eye of Terror opening up where Terra would be if the throne failed. And the Emperor almost acts like a regulator for the power of the throne itself. One of the interesting things we kind of learned about the throne during the end of the Horus Heresy was when Malkador the Sigillite had to sit on the throne for scant hours to give the Emperor time to defeat Horus in combat, that as the fuel to feed the throne from Malkador's spirit was used up, the throne did not diminish in power. It seemed to actually gain more and more power and start to melt the gold leaf from the very top vaults of the palace inner dungeon itself. And so the Emperor almost acts like a regulator for it, not just a source of power for the throne, and then the Emperor uses it as best he can to protect humanity. Now, the throne has been failing essentially ever since then, 10,000 years earlier, and no one really knows how to fix any of it because it's made from technology that is also essentially truly unknown from where it really came from. It's possible it's such an esoteric piece of tech that the Emperor might have understood a lot about it, but he might not even known where it came from really, and was simply utilizing it and kind of realized ways he could use it. It doesn't mean he knew exactly everything about it. So essentially this is just simply a true piece of lore. There's not much else to say about it right now, other than definitely the throne is failing. What will happen when it fails? Who knows if they're ever going to take that dive in the lore to give us that moment, but a lot of people think that the Emperor will reincarnate at that point and become an active character again in the setting. Others believe that it might lead to just more chaos, both literally and figuratively. Next is a bit of older lore that, from researching again, seems to be somewhat valid still, although there's a lot of contradictions in this lore, and none of it appeared in the Horus Heresy series at all, so it was kind of abandoned there, essentially, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's completely untrue. And that is the topic of the Sensei. And so the Sensei are essentially the children of the Emperor, like his genetic offspring, from many different lineages over the tens of thousands of years the Emperor was alive and, had families at some point, had children, and then different members of his family gained certain levels of function from his genetics. Some of them are immortal. Some of them have the ability to essentially regenerate wounds and be immune to chaos, much like the Emperor is. And essentially, the biggest conflicting lore about them is one source called Realm of Chaos, Slaves to Darkness, claims that the Sensei sons are both infertile and that they are psychic blanks and can't be seen by other psychers. So that, they have the blank gene, the untouchable gene that shuts down psychers around them and makes them valuable agents against psychic users. As the Emperor is what's called a perpetual, which is to say essentially a reincarnating immortal version of a human in a lot of cases. Not all perpetuals have that ability, but it seems like the Emperor probably does. And he seemed to have passed that on to Vulcan, for example, one of the Primarchs, who comes back from death every time he dies. We have not seen the Emperor truly die yet, so we don't know if he has this ability as a perpetual, but likely I would say he does. But just like that, the Sensei seemed to have the immortality part of it being a perpetual, but maybe don't have that reincarnating ability, but I don't think we really truly know much about them. It seems like there is some kind of through line of Sensei who know their true nature as the Emperor's offspring and seek out their other siblings and try to tell them who they are. There is apparently the possibility of some of them becoming Gray Sensei, which is ones that volunteer to actually help Chaos, although I've never seen an example of one of those ever in the lore. It seems like, I don't know exactly where that comes from, if it's from this book. I haven't read that book, but it seems like it might come from that. And then the Inquisition seems to know about the Sensei as well, and some of them seem to be hostile to the Sensei, and I think others in the Inquisition seem to be, they see them as the Emperor's offspring and not a threat, but it's just like the Inquisition to kind of have a double stance on something. And reading more about the Sensei, they seem to almost be like older lore that was meant to kind of almost emulate the Jedi from Star Wars a little bit, which in the early days Warhammer kind of was in some ways poking fun at Star Wars. A lot of what is described, at least on their wiki articles, make them sound like Jedi to me in some ways. Like, they always fight against the Imperium because they fight for the truth and the right. Like, I don't know, they just seem to be like almost given a bit of a heroic tint, even though they come from the Emperor, who is one of the most conflicted non-heroic beings, going back to that original part of the Iceberg talking about Imperium not being the good guys. I don't think if you asked the Emperor if he thought he was a good guy, that he would say yes to that. He would probably say, what I did is necessary for humanity. I don't think that I am some hero. I don't think the Emperor would claim that title. So they were certainly interesting to read about, but I do think this is considered lore that is abandoned. At least right now it is. They might take it up again in the future, but for now I think this is kind of set on the back burner. It's not really focused on. Not once were the Sensei brought up in any of the Horus Heresy era books where the Emperor is active, and lore about the Emperor is more focused on than in the 40k era. Alright, next we have the Alpha Legion are Loyalists. Yes and no. I mean, I have a video on the Alpha Legion and theories about them, and theories about Alpharius and lore about him. Essentially, the Alpha Legion is so broken as a legion, that, or at least so compartmentalized as a legion, that no individual cell knows much about the next one. One of the more recent books that I read was dealing with the Alpha Legion, and that is the book Hero Master, which that book is essentially following a specific member of the Alpha Legion and his efforts to take control of a Alpha Legion warband and his machinations to do so. And he, at one point in that book, muses on the state of the Legion and how, he's not sure if Loyalists exist out there, but he basically just kind of made the humorous retort to himself that, what a thankless task that would be to, serve this empire that utterly hates you and will never accept you as Loyalists. And then he makes the observation of how two different Alpha Legion cells were both pretending to be Loyalist and then fought each other thinking the other side was actually Loyalists and destroyed each other. So there's a lot of confusion with the Alpha Legion, which is kind of the point of that legion. They are the covert ops, no one knows what the other hand is doing type of faction. I certainly believe that part of the Legion is still Loyalist, but we have not seen any signs of them ever. So we do know that their Gloriana-class battleships are missing. Solomon says that they're unaccounted for and have never been seen again. So who is commanding those ships? Those ships are huge. They're the biggest ships that humanity has produced, except for some Star Fortress type stuff and stuff like the Abyss class of battleship, which were built only during the Heresy. And so I certainly think it's possible that the Alpha Legion would have Loyalists, but hopefully one day we get a book about perspective from one of them. But until then, it's pure theory. There's no proof of this. So next we have the Imperial Lie. Trying to research what this is. It seems to be connected to a Luton video from years ago that he did about the Last Church, which is a novel short story about the Emperor meeting with the last priest on Earth and the last religion left on Earth, and having kind of a philosophical debate over religion and just belief and its need or not need in society, things like that. Now, essentially, I haven't watched that video by Luton. I don't really watch other lore tuber stuff, just so I can make sure I'm having my own thoughts on things for you guys and not just regurgitating what someone else is talking about inadvertently. But it might be referring to just that the Emperor, claimed there was no gods or anything supernatural. Everything could be explained by science with the Imperial truth during the Great Crusade. And that was kind of proven wrong with both he almost becoming a god during the course of the Great Crusade, during the Horus Heresy, I should say. And with the existence of things like the Chaos Gods being kind of, if they're not really gods, they're most definitely something, beyond our understanding, like we would assume a god would be in terms of being a, huge. And even huge is a misnomer because there's no size, I think, in the warp really, but just being essentially these unknowable entities from another dimension. They certainly fit some definitions of at least kind of like Lovecraftian godhood type of things. But ultimately, the Imperial Lie would be the Emperor teaching just secularism and claiming that, getting rid of religion would solve all of humanity's problems, which ended up not being the case. Feel free to leave a comment correcting me if this is not what this is about, but I could find nothing else really that this is pointing to, other than either the Imperial truth being a lie, or, that conversation with the Emperor claiming all the things he did to that priest being a lie as well. And then last for this layer we have is just Cypher. Cypher is still a pretty unknown character. We learned a bit more about him during the Horus Heresy. He is a member of the Dark Angels Legion, and he's essentially a role title within that legion to both help with the direction of that legion, be a moral booster for that legion, things like that. And his exact identity in the current era is unknown, but he is still around. The Imperium tends to see him as a heretic and think he is assisting chaos. The Dark Angels hunt him because he is a remembrance of their past, and the Dark Angels try to purge anyone from that era essentially coming back, whether they're chaos tainted or not. But ultimately, Cypher kind of shows up and disappears where he wants, and his goals seem to be ultimately kind of unknown. He does seem to want to get to the Emperor, but for reasons we don't know, and he almost succeeded in doing that by assisting Robot Goleman when he first came back. But Robot wouldn't let him near the throne. He had him arrested, essentially, and then Cypher disappeared again. So, Cypher has a great blade across his back, and what exactly that is, we don't know. We don't know if he wants to give it to the Emperor. We don't know if it was something the Lion related. But essentially, Cypher, just as his name suggests, he is kind of a Cypher. He is an unknown entity. And who exactly he is and what his motives are basically not known. And who knows if we will ever be told what he is actually all about. But essentially, he is left over from that era and on some sort of dedicated mission to do something. And as of now, unless Cypher is hiding his true identity, we have not seen him meet the Lion, who is back. And it'd be interesting to see them meet, or see the Lion discuss with Goleman about Cypher, like what he could be, things of that nature. And I think for now I'm going to leave this part off here. I'll probably put out another part tomorrow as well. I'm probably going to do 2 layers per video, so that leaves us with 1, 2, 3, 4 total parts of this series is what I'm going to try to aim for. Just to try to not make these super long, but somewhat longer form for you to get my thoughts on these topics. I'll go as long as I need to delve into some of these topics. As we get deeper into this, some of this is more interesting, but there's just sometimes not much about it. It's just pure theory, and it's fun to discuss, but there's not much substance to some of this. But it's fun to talk about the speculation for sure on some of this stuff, and I would have probably made the video longer if I hadn't have talked at length about some of these topics already in previous videos, which I will recommend you to go check out if you want to know more about some of these subjects that we have not gotten to in detail in this video. But as always, I hope you liked spending some time here, and I appreciate the time you've chosen to spend here, whether you are new or have been here for the over a year now that this channel's been alive and kicking. I appreciate your support and encouragement. Even when I haven't been able to make a video as consistently, the channel still has been fairly active, and it's been nice to see that. Nice to see more subscribers coming in still. I will do my best to be somewhat consistent in getting videos out and having discussions with you all. I'm looking forward to Space Marine 2 coming out, and I should be live streaming that. And I could probably play with a couple of you as well if you want to co-op it with me. if you have a couple of you pop in and have the game. So as always, I hope you have a great day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for your time. Talk to you soon.